Right, we've all waited a long time for him. This is the party chairman, Mr. Nick Griffin. Without further ado, Nick.
Thank you very much. Well, I know there's a fair few new faces here. Very welcome to see. Also people who've stuck with us and also people who've come back. All of you are really welcome, and it's good to see a good turnout here tonight because, as the old hands will know, every now and again the nationalist movement goes through a period when we get knocked and we get hit and we go backwards, and then after that there's always a time of rebuilding. And that's what we're doing now in Manchester, in the Northwest, in Britain as a whole. We're absolutely now in the rebuilding phase. It's always a really exciting phase, seeing fresh people come on, doing things, moving forward. It's always a great phase to be in. And this election coming up in Manchester, in fact these series of elections are very important. They're well timed for us to give us the opportunity to really move forward. And we're going to be rebuilding. You'll have seen, I know, earlier on this evening, the great leaflets that are now coming out. I've seen past rebuildings, and each one you're starting really almost from scratch again. We're not starting from scratch this time. Despite all the pressure we've been under, we've kept a really good hardcore together. The leaflets we're putting out, the material that bnptv are putting out on a website, it's actually better than we've ever had before. So we're starting from a really high base of starting this building back. I'll come on and talk about the leaflets a little bit more in due course. But there's two fascinating opinion polls came out in this last couple of years while they were trying to ground us down. And these are the things that tell me that our bounce back, our rebuilding is going to be really, really fast. Now, the first one was, you'll remember the question time. Lynching, when I was put on that. That was part of, came out at the same time as the Equalities Commission attack on us. It was part of a concerted attempt to destroy this party. And the powers that be thought that putting me on television and lynching me in public would be the killer blow. They got a huge shock when the week after that question time ambush, the opinion polls showed 24% of the entire British population now saying they'd consider voting British National Party. So that's after they threw everything they possibly could at us. Our rating in the opinion polls was the highest ever. And when 24% say they're now thinking about voting for us, take several things into account. That's the 24% who dare say what they're thinking. How many more daren't say it? You must all know people who'd like to come here tonight but daren't because perhaps their daughter's in the police force, their lad's just joined the army, they work for the civil service, the local hospital or whatever. You must all know people in that category, and there's millions of people out there like that, even people who just want to vote for us or say they'd like to vote for us, but someone's phoned them up. Someone has telephoned them and they're asking. They've no idea who this is. So how many people will say, oh, no, not me? So 24% underestimates it. And then on top of that, you've got to consider that's 24% across the board. Now, some of those are in riches. Now, a few of the immigrants in this country, quite a few of them are decent people. Some of them are on our side. As a matter of fact, the Sikhs in particular, there's quite a lot of West Indians or part West Indians who came here years ago. They paid their taxes, they fit in, their lads have been in the army. They also, some of them, would vote for us. But overall, voting British National Party or thinking about voting British National Party is something that British people do. English, Scots, Irish and Welsh, and most others don't. So you think of the population of Manchester. How many of those, in fact, would never in a million years think about voting British National Party? So the 24% is the whole lot. But out of the British population, the real British population, is probably 30%. And then on top of that, you've got the ones who daren't say it. So it's a huge, huge figure. And that came out when we were supposed to be at our lowest ebb. And now we're rebuilding. An even more important one, an astounding figure, I think, came out in Salford. You remember Hazel Blears when she got caught up in the expenses scandal? And the Daily Express, the next day after the story broke, went into Salford and they came, what was the figure? 47%, wasn't it? 47%. They said 47% of people in Salford are now saying they'll vote British National Party. Now again, the same thing applies, that quite a few people presumably wouldn't dare say it to a journalist in the street. So it's over half, it's got to be over half of the people in Salford at that point were prepared to vote British National Party. And again, that was when we were supposed to be at our lowest ebb. Now, we know in the general election that came after it, 47% of the people in Salford didn't vote British National Party, obviously. But the fact that at that moment they were prepared to say that they were willing to vote for us should give you an idea of how much, the immense amount of soft support there is out there, which just needs something to make it crystallise. And then it'll all happen. And that's where we are now. We're just one crisis away from that happening. Because if it could happen in Salford over the local MP being accused of and getting her fingers caught in the till, if that could make 47% of people there say, that's it, I've had enough, I'm now going to vote British National Party, then it can happen in other places, and it can happen, that wasn't exactly a big crisis, was it? Local MP gets caught with fingers in till. How bad's that, really, in terms of the grand scheme of things? But that one thing was enough to flip something in the heads of the people of Salford. And unfortunately, we didn't have the election that day, or it would have happened. Instead, there was time for them to put it back to bed a bit, and they forgot about Hazel Blears and so on. So, well, at that time, we were a little bit unlucky. But what happened there shows us what is going to happen when our luck comes in. And in particular, that was the result of one little crisis. I want to talk tonight about four, very briefly, the four crises which are out there, any one of which can flick the switch in the heads of the whole of the British people. We're not looking at one crisis, we're looking at four. The first one is the grooming issue. And people are pretty angry about that now, and understandably so. But it's only just beginning, that. They're still arresting Muslim paedophiles. Almost every week now, another group are arrested. And because people now see what's happened for a long time is people have thought, well, obviously they're allowed to get away with it. The police aren't interested. There's no point complaining at all. That's been the state in most British cities for the last 30 years. And it's broken that now. Everybody now knows that the police are prepared to arrest them. Not all the time, not all of them, but sometimes. That alone guarantees that for the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more waves of arrests as more and more girls and their families come forward. An even more important crack in the dam is that in a couple of places, they've now started paying compensation to girls and their families who've been so terribly let down by the police, by the local authorities, by the local education services. They started paying compensation. Now, as a party, we don't feel easy with this compensation culture that's in Britain as a whole. When someone stubs their toe and they go running to get compensation, which comes out of the public purse, i.e. out of our pockets. But nevertheless, in this case, it's justice and it's right. And what's more, the fact that there is now compensation available, how much difference is that going to make to the number of people lining up to get compensation? There will come a time when there'll be people lining up to get compensation who haven't been so much as winked at by a Muslim taxi driver. But it's going to happen because that's the nature of the beast. And the dam has now started to crack open. So this is going to be a huge story that goes on and on and on. And we're going to help make it go on and on and on. I mentioned the fantastic leaflets that we've now got. This one, I'm sure you've all seen it. It really is a superbly effective piece of kit. It's the first piece of literature that I can think of that we've ever actually run past the target audience before we finally put it together. Because we passed this to a number of young girls and asked them their opinion, and we took on board their suggested improvements and so on. So it's absolutely, perfectly aimed at the people who need to get it, at the people who need our help. And so far, and I know this neck of the woods probably has led the way in putting it out, and so far the media haven't bitten. What we really need, so all of you particularly, ladies, fellas here, you can't go outside a school, let's face it, especially not a primary school. Or actually still worse, talking to 13-year-old girls, we'll be in the same trouble. But the ladies can. The ladies can go outside any school and either give it to the mums, and the mums of primary school kids have got little girls of 9 or 10, and also little girls of 12 and 13 and 14, so they need to know, and they need to know that something can be done. So the ladies especially, please do that. And even if you've only, just take a few, if you've got a daughter, a granddaughter, a niece or whatever, just get one or two and say to her, don't go waving it at assembly, if they still have assemblies. You know, that's not a good idea. But take 3 and put one up on the school notice board when no one's looking. But we're coming up to November the 5th. You'll remember, those of you who really remember when Guy Fawkes Day was Guy Fawkes Day and it was a proper British celebration before, because of course it's hideously politically incorrect, so it's gradually being killed. But you remember the old saying, light blue touch paper and retire. That's where we are with this leaflet. And sooner or later, the blue touch paper will reach the dynamite, the little bit of dynamite that's in that leaflet. So that's the first thing. That's going to be stupendous. And as I say, it's something that's rolling on. And those of you who were at Hayward a few months ago, when we had the demonstration in Hayward, that was an astounding thing, where in that little town we had people were driving past. There was a constant queue of people driving past, literally snatching the leaflets out of our hands. Give us more. It was unbelievable what went on there, because people were really angry about what's happened in their town, and not so much angry against the Muslim groomers, angry enough at them, but more angry still at the police and the powers that be for doing nothing about it. One more thing on this subject before I move on, because Rochdale's only just up the road. I was looking at the Rochdale report into the grooming crisis online the other day, and I was looking at the list, the number of people, the list of people who were there in this couple of days inquiry when the great and the good sat down and they beat themselves up over having failed the white working class of Rochdale. And all of a sudden it struck me. It had a list of the police officers who were there, list of the people from social services who were there, had a whole list of people, about 20 from the great and good of Rochdale, all of them parasites on our taxes, that's another story. It suddenly struck me, there was one headmaster was there, but there wasn't a single person from the Education Authority. And they're telling us that they've sorted Rochdale. They're saying, go back to sleep, people, go back to sleep, there's nothing to worry about, move on, you girls are quite safe. That's what they're telling us. But they didn't have a single person there from the Education Authority. That is why we need to get those leaflets out, because in Rochdale, where they've had that utter disaster of letting down all those girls and all that publicity about it, they still can't be bothered to get the Education Authority in there, to get the schools in there. So that tells me the schools will carry on doing absolutely nothing to protect those girls. If they won't protect them, we've got to protect them, and we're going to. That leads on to the second, and a far bigger crisis, in fact, for the powers that be that's looming up, because one of the things that happened, of course, with the grooming inquiry was the way in which the BBC relentlessly and cold-bloodedly and with large amounts of taxpayers' money went about trying to stop people talking about the grooming scandal. It was the BBC that literally conspired with West Yorkshire Police to try to send me to prison twice for talking about the grooming scandal. It was the BBC and all the rest of the media who refused to show our TV broadcast, party political broadcast we made in the 2005 general election, which we made solely about the town of Keighley and about the grooming scandal that was going on there. And they haven't come to court in Keighley yet, that lot. And it was the BBC, they're the ones who more than anyone else say what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable in a party political broadcast. And they said that our broadcast, every word of it true, every word of it qualified by saying, we're not saying this is all Muslims. We're not even saying blame them. We're saying blame the people letting them get away with it. All of that in there, and the BBC were the ones who led the charge to ban it. It was the West Yorkshire Police, likewise, there, who refused to allow Channel 4. They ordered Channel 4 not to show a documentary about grooming before that election in case it helped the British National Party. So the whole British elite were involved in that cover-up, but no one more than the BBC covering up a paedophile scandal. Familiar? Yes. Oh yes. Because of course now it's rolled out to Jimmy Savile. And now already we know it's not just Jimmy Savile, it's a whole nest of them there in the BBC, and everyone from the bottom to the very top of the BBC knew exactly what was going on, but they didn't care. Why didn't they care? Because if you think back, especially to the late 1960s and the 70s and the very early 80s, well, you had the National Council for Civil Liberties, headed up by very senior Labour politicians, including Patricia Hewitt, for instance, allied, directly and openly allied, with the paedophile information exchange. and helping the paedophile information exchange push their policy of initially lowering the age of consent to 14 and then abolishing it altogether. So, at the time when this was going on, the British political elite they weren't turning a blind eye to paedophilia, they were absolutely condoning it and encouraging it. And that's why they did nothing about it. But now times have changed somewhat, and the pendulum has swung back a bit from the crazed excesses of all that. And ordinary people are saying no, because this has now gone too far, because they've seen what harm it's done, unleashing this tidal wave of perversion and horror on young kids. So now they're caught because the BBC was involved and is now known to have been involved in covering up that paedophile scandal. And it's going to come out. But of course it's already spreading further than that. They've already come up with the fact that 2 high-ranking Tory MPs, both of them like Savile, conveniently dead, one of them Margaret Thatcher's private secretary, were also massively involved in abusing young boys in care homes in North Wales. So that started to come out. And where does that stop? Well, heaven only knows, but I'll tell you this. For decades, you remember back in the Cold War, the phrase MAD, mutually assured destruction. That was when the Russians had nuclear bombs pointing our way, and we and the Americans had nuclear bombs pointing their way, and because of the mutually assured destruction possibility, nobody dared use their nuclear bomb. The dirty secret, the really dirty secret of the British political elite is that Tory, Lib Dem and Labour alike have all got their paedophile scandals. They've had them for decades, right up to the very top levels of the House of Commons, right up into the House of Lords. And because the Tories knew if they exposed the Labour paedophiles, the Labour Party would expose their paedophiles, and the Lib Dems are thinking, don't even look at us! And let it be said, certain Liberals in Rochdale, at the very top of the list, oh yes, yeah, absolutely so. Because of this mutually assured destruction problem, they all kept stum. They all covered up this filthy, revolting secret that they had. But it's all starting to unravel. It's not yet guaranteed that it's going to unravel, but I think probably given what happens on the internet these days, it's awash with speculation. Some of it almost certainly 100% accurate, like Ted Heath, that rotten traitor who signed us up to the European Union, who started with a little boat. Sailor Ted started with a little boat. His first morning cloud was a little rowing dinghy. By the time the old traitor retired, he got £1 million luxury yacht in the money of those days, on what was in fact a very low salary in those days, even as Prime Minister. Where did you get the money for that? He got the money for that, for selling out this country, for giving away 1,000 years of freedom. But he almost certainly was one of them. But if you look on the internet, you'll see wave after wave of astounding names. And I've looked, and some of it fits in with rumours from local areas, places like Leicester, places like Rochdale, that I heard of years ago. When I've spoken to people who say, you know, we know people who've been there. Absolutely so. But the British law of libel, of course, is fantastically effective at allowing the rich, people rich enough, to defend their reputations, whether it's a good reputation or a bad reputation which should be exposed. People with the money have been able to use that law to cover up all sorts of things. But I think the weight of the internet now is such it's all about to break, and the whole lot's going to unravel. And, well, that's going to be a fascinating thing, not least because, hand in hand with the most revolting sexual perversion, in the case of these parties and these people, there also goes financial corruption on a huge scale. In fact, it's an old thing, nothing unusual this. It reaches its height in America, in American politics, where, for instance, the Teamsters Union had enormous control for decades over the Democrat Party. How? Primarily because when they found a young, up-and-coming Democrat politician, as well as giving them the money to get on and fight campaigns, they'd also feed whatever private vice he had, if they could find one. And they favour people who've got a vice, because if In the days of Prohibition, it was alcohol. That's how it started. But then later on, it becomes little boys or little girls or cocaine, whatever it is. If they've got a politician with a vice and they've got the evidence of it, he's in their pocket forever. So that's the way these people work. And I can tell you that there's various very rich and very powerful people who, especially over the last 20 years, have made and are making and plan to carry on making enormous fortunes out of this country by looting our public commonwealth. If you went back 40 years, 50 years, 100 years, they called us ordinary people, we were called hands. It wasn't factory workers, factory men and women, it was factory hands. The reason for that was that's how they made money out of ordinary people, what our hands would do. When they gave up manufacturing industry in this country, when they said we'll ship it all to China, the super rich were giving up the way they'd made money out of us. They had the industry, we made things in the factories, and they sold them and they made money. And they gave us a bit of it. That's how they used to make money. The British people were hands. We're not hands anymore. We make bugger all in this country, I'm afraid. It's all made overseas, vast amounts of it. There's a few little bits left, like Rolls-Royce, making specialist engines and specialist cars. Virtually all the rest has gone. So how are they going to make money out of us? And shepherds who shear sheep of their fleeces, they're not going to suddenly stop shearing the sheep. They're not going to stop butchering them every now and again, because shepherds will do what shepherds have to do, which is to exploit the sheep. And so how are they going to exploit us? Over the last 20 years, they set about exploiting the British people by privatising the gas, the electricity, the water, the council houses, and now they're getting on through, because the school system is being privatised. The health service, as you know, has already been privatised, all the profitable bits, but not the rest yet. The prison service, the supply chains to the army, the whole lot's been privatised. In the papers today, they're talking about privatising the roads. Not just the new build ones, they're talking about privatising all the motorways and then putting spy cameras on so that if you're rich, you can go on the motorway, and if you're an ordinary person, you can't afford to, or you risk losing a fine for doing it. So everyone will drive on their roads, they'll clog it up, the country will be a disaster area, even more than it is now, but never mind, it's going to make them a big profit. But there'll be huge opposition to that. There's been huge opposition building up to all these privatisation scams, so they have to force them through with politicians. So they have to have politicians who are compliant. How do they make them compliant? They give them backhanders, and they get ones who are bent. It's as simple as that. And so, as the paedophile scandal unravels, there's every possibility, especially if we help it nudge it along, and believe me, we will, there's every possibility that it'll suddenly start to spill out from one form of corruption into another form of corruption. And a relatively small paedophile scandal in 1997, involving one murderer who appeared to be acting alone, brought down the government in Belgium. It was called the True scandal. And it destroyed not just the Belgian government, the governing party, it destroyed the whole of the political elite in Belgium. The whole thing basically collapsed. They were effectively without a government for 6 months because nobody was trusted. Their hands were all covered in muck and filth. We're that close to that happening in Britain as well. And when it does, it's not just Salford and Hazel Blears with a little bit of dodgy dealing on finances. It's far, far worse than that on a huge, spectacular scale. And they're all tied up in it, and that's that far from happening. It's going to be very exciting when it does. The third thing, again, following on, the finances, they're ripping this country off by the people who privatise this and privatise that and take all the good bits. That, in turn, is a tiny fraction compared to what's been done by the real crooks, the real villains in this piece, the banks. You know, when people get upset about the fact that the Tory government is now spending more on foreign aid, 12.6 billion a year, than it does on the police, 12.1 billion a year, people are rightly getting upset about that when crime is out of control, when it makes ordinary people's lives a misery, but they're busy giving the money to corrupt dictators in the third world. It doesn't help the ordinary people in the third world. None of it gets to them. Poor sods, doesn't get to them, it stays with the super rich in their countries. So the super rich in our country take it from us, they then give it to the super rich in another country, their mates. People get very upset about that, rightly so. But in the grand scheme of things, 12.6 billion is chicken feed compared with the 500 billion which is the best estimate that they've given the banks in the last few years to bail them out and prop them up from their own stupidity and their own corruption. And we as nationalists, we're the only people who've had a firm critique of the banking system, and a call for something really different, a real alternative. And we've said for decades that the fundamental problem with the banks isn't the way they rip you off, you go overdrawn for a couple of weeks or a couple of hours and you get this letter and they charge you 75 quid for the letter and so on. They go overdrawn to the tune of billions and we have to give them even more billions. But when the boot's on the other foot, it's not quite so comfortable. But that's not the problem with the banks. The core of the problem with the banking system is that these people create money out of thin air. They create credit out of thin air and then they lend it to the rest of us at interest and we have to pay it back in real money. And it's such an incredible thing that, it's such a fantastic concept, that for years people haven't quite believed us when we've said it. Last week, an amazing article in the Daily Telegraph by a fellow called Ambrose Evans Pritchard said that the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, have just concluded a study. It's called, for those of you who want to go back and look at it, the Chicago Project Revisited. The Chicago Project was in the 1930s, the last time the international financial system was collapsing, and a group of very high-level economists in Chicago said, look, the core of the problem is private banks creating credit. The people who create the wealth, the credit of a nation, should be the government of the nation under the democratic control of the people of the nation. That's how it should work, and that's what needs doing. Then, because they had a world war and because we then had a period of enormous growth, everyone forgot about the Chicago Project and about those plans for monetary reform. And no less an organisation than the International Monetary Fund is now saying the whole system is so broken, that's the only way forward, to go back to that and take this power to create credit out of the hands of private banks, put it in the hands of the nation state so that this credit that we need is created and it's spent into circulation by the government, investing in industry, doing constructive, useful things instead of lent into circulation by the banks. And it's a huge step forward that this has now become, it's now accepted. We've been right all along. For 60 years, for 40 years, for 30 years, 20 years, any time it's ever been mentioned, they've said, oh, the BNP's policies, the National Front before it, it's funny money. It's not real, it doesn't really happen, it's a fantasy. And now the International Monetary Fund has just confirmed that it is real, that we were right all along. The reason they're doing that, I have some suspicions. I have a nasty feeling they're going to suddenly say, but of course, it shouldn't be the nation state state's outdated. It should be us. A World Bank creating the world's credit. I think that's probably where they're going with that one. So it's not all good news, but the fact they've accepted that what we've said is right all along, which means that all the others who've allowed private banks to create money at interest and thereby basically own the country and own everything, they're guilty of an enormous crime. Because when you have private banks sucking the country dry, it's not a victimless crime just because it's money. Because old ladies die on hospital trolleys because there's not enough money to pay enough nurses. People have their houses wrecked and their kids turned into smackheads because the government can't pay enough police to be on the beat. British soldiers going to war in wars we shouldn't even be in Land Rovers with no armour underneath them because we can't afford to equip the military. Because all we do with our money in the final analysis is give it to these corrupt parasitic banks. So it's not a victimless crime. Every single person in this country who has died before their time because of lack of medical care is a victim of that crime. That's just one example. And it's all coming out. But one reason the IMF are doing it, I believe, is that they know that they're at the end of the road. That the world financial system is completely broken. It cannot be fixed just with more creation of money, more lending of money, if it's done by private banks. And they know that at the point of a real crisis of finance capitalism, and the whole thing, it's a huge train wreck, and we're just seeing it's in slow motion. But the train is about to hit the buffers on a spectacular scale. It really is. And a financial crisis, the likes of which hasn't been seen since the 1930s, probably even worse than that, as a matter of fact. And the other thing to bear in mind, people in the 30s, they were used to hard times. Any adult in the 1930s, from an ordinary working class background, whether it was in the country or living in a city, had grown up with, if they were full when they went to sleep every night for a week, that had been a good week. And for their parents, that had been a really good week. That was where they were. If they had shoes on their feet, when they were kids, they were happy with that. They were potentially surprised with that. If the shoes didn't have holes in, that was the bonus. And in the 1930s, when they went back to real poverty, it was people who had it really hard. You know, most of the lads who joined the armies all over Europe in the First and the Second World Wars, most of them didn't have fillings. Not because there wasn't dentistry, but because they didn't need fillings, but because their diet had so little sugar in it that their teeth were healthy. That's how poor people were, compared with what we are now. It's an astounding difference, and we're about to go back to those times. And I tell you what, people aren't going to like it. Our people, sadly, are quite soft and spoilt, and me, and I'm entitled to this, and we're entitled to that. And yet we are entitled to some things. We're entitled to control our own country. We're entitled to have the wealth this country can make in our hands, rather than the hands of foreign private bosses. We're entitled to those things, but no one's entitled to a free lunch. You've got to work for it. And far too many people in this country, you know, again, people think about the spongers from overseas. We'll sort the spongers from overseas out. We'll stop the spongers from overseas coming in. But let's face it, we've got plenty of spongers of our own in this country as well. And those spongers and people who work quite hard but are in sponging professions and so on, and people who think they work hard but don't really, all of them are going to get a very nasty shock in the Britain that's coming, because there's rough times out there. And when they do, they're going to want people to blame, and they'll very rightly turn on the banks and the people who let them loose. So our time's coming in that as well. Which brings me to the final point, again, which really is our time. That whenever you get, in history, a ruling elite which has got itself in a real mess at home, when people are looking for scapegoats at home, what do? If you've got trouble at home, you go and fight a war abroad. It never fails to keep the stupid masses happy and employed and get some of them killed off and so on. Yeah, it never fails. Go and have a war overseas. And that's what they're going to do this time. And they're shaping up for a war against Iran because the Iranians have a large amount of oil. And because they have a large amount of oil, they've got a growing population. And they also know their oil will run out. And they are absolutely desperate to, before they run out of oil, have an effective nuclear power program. Because otherwise their country goes back to a howling medieval wilderness. And they don't want that to happen. They're not mad like Britain. They don't think they can get by with stupid wind farms or a bit more insulation in Granny's loft. It ain't going to work. You need nuclear power. That's the only way to do it in present technology, effectively. The Iranians know that, and they're going about it. The Israeli Defence Minister just yesterday said that Saudi Arabia could have nuclear bombs within weeks, anytime they want to. But they're not interested in Saudi Arabia. It's just Iran they're interested in for various geopolitical reasons. So they're picking a fight with Iran. We shouldn't be involved in that fight, because even if Iran is a threat to Israel, Israel's got hundreds of nuclear bombs, more than enough to deter the Iranians. In fact, the head of the Israeli military yesterday said that the key reason that the Iranians want a nuclear bomb is so that what happened to Gaddafi won't happen to them. Well, you can't exactly blame them, really, can you? If you don't want to be gang raped and then shot in the back of the head, get yourself a nuclear bomb. That's the lesson that they showed by what happened to Gaddafi. So that's why the Iranians are trying to do it. If they had a nuclear bomb, they would never dare to use it, because the Israelis would turn the whole of Iran into one giant, unhealthy glass car park within about 5 minutes. So they'd have that mutually assured destruction, balance of terror, and actually it would probably bring peace to the Middle East, especially when they say that the Saudis would also get one and the Turks would get one. And when the whole place is bristling with nuclear weapons, it'd look rather like Western Europe, when the French have got them and we've got them and the Americans have got them dotted all over the place and so on. So it wouldn't be the end of the world. It wouldn't even be the end of Israel or the end of Iran. It would just be a nuclear standoff. And if they want to have a nuclear standoff, that's their right. And it's nothing to do with Britain. So we simply shouldn't be involved in it. But as you know, we're going to be involved in that fight, as we're involved in Afghanistan, as we're involved in Iraq. And the same people who are telling tales about the threat that Iran poses to world peace were exactly the same people who, in the run-up to the Iraq war, were saying the Iraqis have weapons of mass destruction and they can destroy Britain in 40 minutes. And the sheeple duty went off and supported war to an extent, and Tony Blair was able to get us into that war. And afterwards they admitted, oh yeah, there never were any weapons of mass destruction. Well, likewise, it's the same this time. But they involved us then in a war that had nothing to do with us, at a cost of hundreds of British lives, of our very bravest and our best, and a cost of billions of pounds of British money, and a loss of what remaining goodwill we had all throughout the Muslim world. And we're not keen on Muslims in this country in any large numbers, but we've got no quarrel with the Muslim world whatsoever. They shouldn't be here Islamifying Britain, and we shouldn't be over there trying to westernise their countries. Now, that's a message that I believe everyone in Britain gets. I've never spoken at a meeting, I've never spoken to a group of people in a pub or to someone in a shopping precinct or whatever, and we got into talking about this sort of thing. I've never spoken to anyone who doesn't agree with our policy that Britain should be prepared to fight in, if we have to, but only if it's in British interests. Everybody gets that, but it's a little bit sort of distant for a lot of people, nevertheless. What isn't going to be distant is the moment the first shot is fired in Iran, oil prices will go up 4 times. Overnight, bang. Petrol prices, 4 times, bang. Distribution prices, bang, 4 times. Food prices, not double, because transport isn't the whole of it, but it's going to be an enormous increase. Prices will go through the roof the moment there's any serious trouble there. And again, what are people going to think? Because when if prices had gone through the roof 10 years ago, most people had a little bit to spare. You could afford the prices to go up. Not anymore. People out there, you must know how hard times are. You've only got to look at the shopping precincts. Shop after shop after shop. Shut up, boarded up, closing down sales. It's a catastrophe on our high streets. It's because there isn't any money out there. No one's got anything spare. Everybody's living on the plastic. Everybody's living on what they can borrow. I can remember when a pawn shop was something in a Charles Dickens novel, and you never saw a pawn shop anywhere, even in poor parts of Britain. And now, cash converters, all the rest of it, everywhere. They're one of the few things taking over the empty shops. It's one of the few growth industries. That tells you you're in a position where no one's got any spare cash. And yet these crazy bastards with their crazy wars are about to involve us in something which will send the price of fuel through the roof 3 or 4 times overnight. And when that happens, people are going to be so angry about it and scared about it. And again, they're going to want answers. And we've got the answers, because we've got the answers to why they're doing it and the very simple solution to it, which is leave other people fight their own wars. Don't involve us. So there we are. That's where we are. We've got this party which has survived the attacks on us, which is clearly, you all know it, you can all feel it, recovering, which has got the best publicity material in the printed word, in the recorded words, through the internet and so on, that we've ever got. We've got a website which is still more popular than that of all the other parties put together. It has been for the last 10 years, and it's still that. And in fact, our lead's increasing again, because we're more sophisticated than we were. We've got a tremendous amount of experience. We've got great local teams. We know how to fight elections far better than we used to. We've been held back of late because the Labour Party's been not exactly in a roll, but compared with the Tories, they look quite attractive to a lot of ordinary people who don't quite know what's going on. So, it's been hard, but we're past all of that. And most of all, we've got a reputation, and I say you saw it when 47% of people in Salford suddenly turned round and said they vote BNP. That wasn't out of the blue. That was because of the work the activists have done for years and years and years. The hard craft, building up, our reputation as always being there, as always being outspoken, as not being afraid to speak out, even though sometimes it's painful for us, of being the only ones who tell it like it is. Even the people who don't agree with us respect us for telling it like we see it. That's the key thing. So we've got that incredible reputation of being far-sighted. We've got the advantage, having never been involved in anything like government, have never had anyone, none of our people, been tempted by the corruptions that come, and because we're ordinary people, instead of this really weird, twisted, upper-class English problem that a lot of the others have, we're not infested with paedophiles and sexual perverts. So we're a clean party. We're a party of clean hands. Yeah, we're rough and ready, but we're clean, ordinary, decent people. And that's a huge advantage on the other. We're a party with the answers on really important issues, especially the financial crisis. The others can only argue whether they're going to cut this or whether they're going to cut that. We can simply say, we're going to cut the banks, we're going to cut them out of the loop, and we're going to do it the proper way, the way which even the IMF say is the only way to get out of the mess. And above all else, perhaps, for some people, with a party that really stands for peace. They can call us racists all they like, but we've never murdered a single Iraqi. The Labour Party and the Tory Party between them murdered at least 200,000 Iraqi children before the war even started. They're the racists, they're the murderers, not us. So we're the party that's far-sighted, we're the party that's clean, we're the party that's here with the answers, we're the party of peace. On all these brilliant leaflets, we're going to be putting it out, and with your help and papers and the message we're putting out, there's one phrase which we're finishing everything with, time and time again, from now on. With us, make Britain better. That's what it's all about. Let's get out there and make those people believe what we believe, that what we know, that we are here and we are going to make Britain better. Thank you.